The rain has a way of washing away certainties. It blurs the edges of reality, distorts sounds, and transforms familiar landscapes into something just different enough to make you question what you're seeing. These three stories happened on separate, rainy nights to ordinary people who had no reason to expect anything unusual. But when the downpour began, something else seeped in with it. The man at the window. I've collected accounts like these for years now. This first one comes from Elizabeth, Ellie to friends, a woman who reached out after reading about similar experiences online. I've verified what I could: property records, police reports, even weather data for the nights in question. Everything checks out. But what happened to her in that house during those rainy nights in October remains unexplained. The first sighting occurred just before midnight on a Tuesday. Rain had been falling steadily since sunset, not the dramatic kind with lightning and thunder, but the persistent kind that seems to soften reality itself. Ellie was working late, as she often did since her divorce 2 years prior. Her small home office faced the street, with her desk positioned so she could glance occasionally at the world outside. A copy editor by trade, she'd taken on extra freelance work that week. A manuscript that needed urgent attention for a nervous first-time author. It was about 11:40, she told me during our interview. I remember checking the clock because I was debating whether to finish the chapter or leave it for morning. She stood to stretch her cramping shoulders the way she did every hour or so. Almost without thinking, her eyes drifted toward the window. The street was empty, as it usually was at that hour in her quiet New Jersey suburb. Except for one thing that wasn't empty at all. Directly across from her house, beneath the weak cone of light from a street lamp, stood a man. At first, I didn't think anything of it, Ellie said, her fingers tightening around her mug of tea as she recalled the moment. People sometimes walk their dogs late, but there was no dog, and he wasn't walking. The man was perfectly still, just standing there, in the rain, facing her house. What struck her most wasn't his presence, but a peculiar detail. He held an umbrella at his side, closed and unused, while the rain soaked through his dark coat. His face was difficult to make out at that distance, through the distortion of raindrops. On glass, but she could tell he was looking directly at her window. Ellie switched off her office light to see better, wondering if perhaps it was someone she knew, a neighbor locked out maybe, or someone having car trouble. But in the few seconds it took for her eyes to adjust to the darkness, the figure vanished. Not walked away, simply gone. She peered out for several minutes, squinting through the rain-streaked glass, but there was nothing. Just the empty street, the gentle rush of water in the gutters, and an inexplicable tightness in her chest that hadn't been there before. She finished her work an hour later and went to bed, attributing the incident to fatigue, to the tricks shadows and raindrops can play on tired eyes. By morning, with sunlight streaming through her kitchen windows as she made coffee, the strange man seemed like nothing more than a momentary oddity, until 2 nights later, when it rained again. This time, Ellie was in her living room, curled, on the sofa with a book and half listening to a jazz program on the radio. The same steady rain tapped against the windows, creating that peculiar cocoon of isolation that rainy nights often do. She looked up from her page, gaze drifting naturally, toward the front window, and there he was again. Same position, same stillness, same closed umbrella at his side. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she set her book down. I felt like I was being studied, she later explained, like a butterfly pinned to a board. She reached for her phone, on the coffee table, never taking her eyes off the motionless figure. The camera app opened with a chime that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. She raised her phone, framed the shot through a gap in the blinds, and captured 3 quick photos. I needed proof, she said, for myself as much as anything, to know I wasn't imagining things. When she checked the photos immediately after, her breath caught. The street was there, the rain was there, the lamplight was there, but the man wasn't. In every shot, just an empty patch of sidewalk where he should have been standing. Ellie looked up from her phone back to the window. He was still there, unmoving. She took another photo. Again, nothing. The rain intensified, drumming harder, against the roof. Ellie sat frozen on her couch, phone clutched in her hand, watching the figure who watched her house. 5 minutes passed like this, a standoff neither had agreed to. Then her phone buzzed with a text message, startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. It was from her sister in Phoenix. "How's the storm?" Seeing wild footage on the news. When Ellie looked back up, the man was gone. The next morning she found herself questioning her own perception. Had there really been anyone there at all? The empty photographs suggested otherwise. Perhaps it was stress, or loneliness, or simply the mind's tendency to find patterns and meaning where none exist. After her divorce from Mark, the therapist had warned her about periods of heightened anxiety, about how the mind can manufacture concerns to replace the ones that had previously occupied it. But 3 days later, something happened that couldn't be so easily dismissed. Janet Pruitt, the retired physics teacher who lived across the street, caught Ellie as she was collecting her mail. Janet was in her 70s, a widow who kept to herself but always nodded hello. "I saw your ex the other night," Janet said without preamble. "Standing in the rain, is everything okay between you two?" Ellie felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "My ex?" The tall fellow. Mark, right? It was odd to see him just standing there, looking quite drenched too. Every detail of their conversation is seared into Ellie's memory. The way Janet's reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck, the slight tilt of her head, the genuine concern in her eyes. "Janet," Ellie said carefully, "Mark lives in Oregon now, has for almost 2 years." The older woman's forehead creased in confusion. "Well, that's strange. I could have sworn he was right there Tuesday night, and again on Thursday, just standing and looking at your house." Ellie's mouth went dry. "Did you see him any other time?" Janet thought for a moment. "No, just those 2 rainy nights. I noticed because it seemed peculiar, someone standing out in the weather like that." That evening, Ellie called her ex-husband. They rarely spoke anymore. Their divorce had been amicable but final, the kind where both parties recognize it's better to make a clean break. Mark answered on the 4th ring. "Ellie, everything okay?" His voice had the unique quality of northwestern rain in it. Softer, more persistent than the sudden East Coast downpours she'd grown accustomed to. She asked him, as casually as possible, if he'd been to New Jersey recently. His laugh confirmed what she already knew. He hadn't left Portland in months, was swamped with his new architectural firm, was, at that very moment, watching the rain through his own window 3,000 miles away. After they hung up, Ellie sat in her silent kitchen, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock above the stove and the beginning patter of yet another, rainfall. The weather report had predicted intermittent showers all week, unusual for October, the meteorologist had noted. As darkness fell and the rain intensified, Ellie found herself moving methodically through the house, checking locks, pulling curtains closed, turning on every light. She wasn't normally fearful, had proudly lived alone since the divorce, but something about Janet's confirmation of what she'd seen had transformed an odd occurrence into something that raised the hairs on the back of her neck. She tried to work, but couldn't focus. She tried to read, but found herself rereading the same paragraph multiple times without absorbing a word. Eventually, she settled at her kitchen table with a mug of peppermint tea, her phone beside her, open to the camera app. 9 o'clock passed, then 10. At 11:15, she began to relax, to think perhaps whatever strange coincidence or misunderstanding had occurred was now over. At 11:42, her phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a message, a photo. The image showed her desk in the office, her chair pushed back slightly, her screen still on, showing the manuscript she'd been editing. The angle was low, taken from beneath the desk, looking up and outward toward where she would sit, taken from inside her house. The timestamp read 11:41 p.m., 1 minute ago. Ellie didn't scream. She didn't run. A strange, detached calm settled over her as she stood, phone clutched in her hand. The rain outside had become torrential now, sheets of water cascading down the windows, distorting the world beyond into vague smudges of light and shadow. She listened. The house creaked and settled as it always did during storms. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked. Nothing seemed out of place or unusual, except for the photograph that couldn't possibly exist, moving with the strange deliberation that sometimes accompanies extreme fear. Ellie retrieved the baseball bat she kept in her bedroom closet, a relic from her college days on the university team. She checked each room methodically: bedroom, bathroom, guest room, office, living room, kitchen, closets behind the shower curtain, under beds, nothing. The house was empty. She called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later, 2 officers, who took her statement with professional concern, though she could read the skepticism in their eyes. They searched the house again, more thoroughly than she had, examining locks and windows, finding nothing disturbed or broken. "No signs of forced entry, ma'am," the older officer said. "All your locks and windows are secure." "But the photo," Ellie insisted, showing them her phone. "Someone was in here, someone took this." They examined the image, exchanged glances. "We'll file a report," the younger one said. "Maybe check with your phone carrier about the number. Could be some kind of glitch or spam," but they all knew it wasn't. The photo showed her desk, her chair, her screen with the distinctive manuscript formatting she'd developed herself. It wasn't stock imagery or a random photo. After the police left, Ellie sat awake until dawn, bat beside her, eyes fixed on the front window. The rain continued unabated, forming a constant soundtrack to her vigil. The man never appeared. In the harsh light of morning, she contacted a security company. They installed a complete system the next day: cameras, motion sensors, door, and window alarms. For a week, nothing happened. No strange figures in the rain, no unexplained photos. The security footage showed nothing unusual. Then, exactly 7 days after receiving the mysterious photo, Ellie made a decision. She called a realtor, listed the house, packed her essential belongings. "I couldn't stay," she told me during our interview, now conducted in her new apartment 30 miles away. The police never traced the photo or the number. The security company found nothing. But I just knew someone had been in my house, someone had access, and they were watching me. Ellie's story might end there, with an unexplained occurrence that forced a woman from her home. But there's one final detail she shared, almost as an afterthought. The day she moved out, as the last boxes were being loaded into the truck, the rain started again, the first rainfall since that night. As she did a final walkthrough of the empty house, her phone buzzed with a text, the same unknown number. No photo this time, just 7 words. "I'll find where the rain takes you." She blocked the number immediately, changed her phone the next day. But sometimes when it rains, she still finds herself drawing the curtains closed, checking the locks twice and avoiding windows altogether. "It's not that I believe he's out there," she said, looking down at her hands. "It's that I can't be certain he isn't." The police report remains open but inactive. The photo was never explained. And somewhere, perhaps, a man with a closed umbrella stands in the rain watching an empty house. The last delivery. Some stories begin with a choice that seems inconsequential at the time. For Jared Malik, it was the decision to accept one last delivery on a particularly nasty night in Seattle. A simple tap on his phone screen that would lead him down a rabbit hole of doubt and disquiet. It wasn't unusual for Jared to work late. At 29, he'd been driving for QuickBasket, a high-demand grocery delivery app, for nearly 2 years. The gig economy suited him. He could make his own hours, listen to true crime podcasts while he drove, and avoid the suffocating structure of office work that had nearly broken him at his previous job. That night, a Wednesday in November, had been busier than normal. Rain had been falling since mid-afternoon, the heavy, persistent kind that Seattle was famous for. By 2 a.m. he'd completed 16 deliveries and was ready to call it quits. His Toyota Corolla's wipers struggled against the downpour, and fatigue pulled at the edges of his consciousness. Then his phone pinged with one more request. "I almost ignored it," he later told a friend whose recording of their conversation he shared with me. "I was tired, it was late, and the rain was getting worse, but then I saw the tip." The order came with a $75 pre-tip, unusually generous for a relatively small grocery order. Just a few items: premium coffee beans, specialty crackers, imported cheese, and oddly, 6 bottles of rubbing alcohol. The delivery address was unfamiliar to Jared, somewhere in the industrial district near the port. The pin on the map was weird, Jared recalled. It was like it was trying to locate the place but couldn't quite nail it down, kept shifting slightly. I figured it was just the app glitching because of the weather. He accepted the order. The groceries were already prepared at the 24-hour fulfillment center, bagged and waiting. 15 minutes later, he was driving through the near-empty streets of Seattle's warehouse district, windshield wipers on their highest setting, peering through sheets of rain for address numbers on buildings that seemed abandoned decades ago. The GPS finally settled on a location, a nondescript building with faded brick and no visible signage. There was a single light above a metal door, the kind of yellow bulb that attracts moths in summer, but on this night only illuminated the endless streams of rainwater flowing from a broken gutter. Jared parked as close as he could, but still had to dash through puddles to reach the entrance. There was no obvious doorbell, just a small metal button beside the frame that might once have been labeled. He pressed it and heard a faint buzzing, sound from somewhere deep inside the building. No response. He tried again, then knocked, the sound barely audible over the drumming rain. He was about to give up, to mark the delivery as undeliverable in the app, when the door opened. The man who appeared was tall and thin, perhaps in his 60s, with a pallor that suggested he rarely saw sunlight. He wore a button-up shirt, tucked neatly into pressed slacks, oddly formal for 2:15 a.m., and thin surgical gloves that seemed stark white against the dim backdrop. The most unsettling thing, though, was his silence. The man didn't greet Jared, didn't thank him for the delivery, didn't comment on the weather. He simply stood there, eyes moving from Jared's face to the grocery bags in his hands. Delivery for... Jared consulted his phone, water droplets making the screen difficult to read. Mr. Calloway? The man made no verbal response. Instead, he simply gestured toward a small table just inside the door, barely visible in the dim entryway. The interior beyond was dark, revealing nothing about the building's purpose or contents. Jared hesitated, then stepped forward just enough to place the bags on the table. "I just need a signature or..." he began. But before he could finish, the man closed the door. Not with a slam, there was nothing aggressive about it, but with a firm finality that left Jared standing in the rain, words hanging unfinished. In the damp air. He returned to his car, puzzled. The app showed the delivery as completed, but there was a nagging sense of wrongness about the entire encounter. The man had never spoken, had never confirmed his identity, and the promised cash tip hadn't materialized. "I figured maybe he just forgot about the tip," Jared explained. "It happens sometimes, especially with older customers, but the whole vibe was just off." When he arrived home at his small Fremont apartment, he checked the QuickBasket app. Again. To his surprise, the delivery wasn't listed in his history, not marked as cancelled or incomplete, simply absent, as if it had never happened. The next morning, Jared contacted QuickBasket support. The representative seemed confused. "I'm not seeing any delivery to that address in your account activity," she said. "Are you sure it was through our platform?" "Positive," Jared insisted. "It came through the app just after 2 a.m. I picked up the order at the Ballard Fulfillment Center." There was a long pause on the line. "Let me check something," the representative finally said. A few minutes later, she returned. "We don't have any record of an order to that address last night, and our Ballard Center actually closed at midnight due to staffing issues." Jared felt a chill that had nothing to do with the continuing rain outside his window. "That's impossible. I was there. I picked up the order. I delivered it." "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no record in our system." The conversation ended with the representative suggesting he might have confused the delivery with one from another app or another night. But Jared knew what had happened. He hadn't imagined it. Curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, more primal, pulled him back to the warehouse district the following afternoon. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city with that peculiar clarity that sometimes follows prolonged downpours. The streets were still wet, reflective in the weak November sunlight that managed to break through the clouds. He found the street easily enough. It looked different by day, less ominous, more neglected. And when he located where the building should have been, he felt his stomach drop. It was there, the same faded brick structure, But now he could see what the night and rain had obscured. Boarded windows, graffiti across the lower portion of the wall, and most tellingly, the unmistakable scorch marks of an old fire around several of the second-floor windows. The door he'd approached just hours before was secured with a heavy padlock, rusted from exposure. A faded notice was stapled to one of the boards covering a ground-floor window, barely legible after years of weather, but the word "condemned" was still visible. Jared sat in his car, staring at the building, trying to reconcile what he was, seeing with what he'd experienced. As he watched, an older man walked past with a small dog on a leash. On impulse, Jared rolled down his window. "Excuse me," he called. "Do you know what happened to this building?" The man paused, glanced at the structure, then back at Jared. "The old Penway textile? Been empty since the fire 3, maybe 4 years back. Bad business, that. 3 workers didn't make it out." "So no one's using it now? For anything?" The man gave him a curious look. "Not unless you count the rats and occasional squatters. City's been trying to get it demolished, but you know how these things go. Always some historical preservation mess or ownership dispute." He tugged gently on the dog's leash. "Why? You looking to buy it?" Jared forced a smile. "Just curious. Thanks." As the man continued his walk, Jared remained parked, trying to process the impossibility of what he'd learned. He'd delivered groceries to a condemned building. He'd handed bags to a man who, according to local knowledge, couldn't have been there. And yet, he had the memory of it. The sound of rain on the car roof, the feel of wet paper bags in his hands, the strange pallor of the silent man's face, the surgical gloves pristine white against the gloom. That evening, Jared called QuickBasket support again, this time with a different approach. He identified himself as Officer James Kelly, Seattle PD, investigating a potential fraud case involving their platform. The ruse worked. He was transferred several times until he reached someone with higher clearance. "I need information on a delivery made early Wednesday morning to an address in the Port District," he said, deepening his voice slightly. "We have reason to believe the account may have been compromised." There was hesitation on the line. "I'll need to verify your badge number and department before I can release any information," the supervisor said. Jared knew his deception was about to collapse. "Look," he said, dropping the pretense, "I'm actually the driver who made the delivery. Something really strange happened, and I'm just trying to understand it. The delivery disappeared from my history. The building is abandoned. None of it makes sense." A long silence followed. Then the supervisor's voice returned, noticeably lower. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but there was an order placed through our system at 1:47 a.m. Wednesday. It was processed through an old corporate account that belongs to Penway Textile, the company that used to operate in that building." Jared felt his mouth go dry. "How is that possible? If the company doesn't exist anymore?" "That's just it," she said. "The account was flagged for fraud months ago after the company went bankrupt. It should have been locked. There's no way anyone could have accessed it." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had an edge of genuine concern. "And here's the really strange part. There's no login record. The order just appeared in the system, like someone created it out of thin air." After thanking her, Jared hung up, his mind racing. There had to be a logical explanation. A glitch in the app. A homeless person who'd found a way to place orders through an abandoned corporate account. Something that made sense in the rational world, but none of the explanations felt right. None addressed the fundamental wrongness of the encounter. The silent man with surgical gloves, the building that couldn't be occupied but somehow was. A week passed. Jared continued making deliveries, though he found himself declining orders. That would take him anywhere near the Port District after dark. The incident began to fade slightly, taking its place among the other bizarre but ultimately explainable encounters that delivery drivers accumulate over time. Until he checked his mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a small white envelope. No return address, no postmark, as if it had been hand-delivered. Inside was a crisp $20 bill and a photograph. The image showed Jared standing at the metal door, grocery bags in hand, face partially turned toward the camera. It was unmistakably him, unmistakably that night. The rain was visible as streaks in the dim light, his jacket darkened with moisture. The angle of the photo suggested it had been taken from across the street. Someone had been watching him. On the back of the photo, written in neat, precise handwriting, were 5 words. "Thank you for the alcohol. Jared hasn't made a delivery since. He left Seattle 2 weeks later, moved to Portland, and found work in a brewery where he never has to. Drive alone at night. He deleted all his delivery apps, changed his phone number, started using his middle name. I don't know what happened that night," he told his friend in the recording. "I don't want to know. But sometimes when it rains hard, I think about that silent man, about the surgical gloves, about why someone in an abandoned building needed 6 bottles of rubbing alcohol. And I keep driving. The envelope with the $20 bill and photograph is now in a safety deposit box. Jared has the key, but says he has no intention of ever looking at the image again. Some deliveries, it seems, are never truly completed." Room 313. The third story begins with something many of us have experienced: a delayed flight, a late check-in, a storm outside, and the promise of rest, finally, within reach. For Clara Winters, a 36-year-old project manager for a software development company, these ordinary inconveniences were about to become the prologue to something far more unsettling. It had been a long day of presentations in Detroit, followed by a 3-hour delay at the airport due to weather systems moving across the Midwest. By the time her flight finally landed at Chicago O'Hare, it was past 9 p.m., and the rain that had caused the delays had followed her to Illinois, streaming down the terminal windows in silver rivulets. After collecting her single carry-on suitcase, Clara prided herself on efficient packing for her frequent business trips. She took the shuttle to the airport hotel, where her company had rebooked her for the night. The original plan had been to fly home to Minneapolis that evening, but the storms had disrupted the entire flight schedule. The hotel lobby was quiet when she arrived. A generic business accommodation with muted colors, inoffensive art, and the faint smell of commercial cleaning products that seems universal to all mid-range airport hotels. The young man at the front desk looked relieved to have something to do when she approached. "Checking in?" he asked. "Name, please?" "Clara Winters. Reservation should have been made through TechSphere Inc. earlier today." He typed rapidly, nodded. "Yes, I have you here. Just one night, correct? Checking out tomorrow morning?" Clara confirmed this, signed the digital pad, and accepted her key card, a simple white rectangle with the hotel logo and the number 313 printed in the corner. Standard procedure, nothing remarkable, except for one small comment from the clerk as she turned to leave. "Room 313 is on the 3rd floor, East Wing. It's been a quiet night. I think you might be the only guest on that floor. Sleep well. Ms. Winters." Under normal circumstances, the thought of an empty hotel floor might have been pleasant. No noisy neighbors, no sounds of doors slamming or televisions blaring through thin walls. But something about the way he said it, combined with her fatigue and the persistent sound of rain against the lobby's large windows, gave Clara a momentary chill. She dismissed it as travel exhaustion and headed for the elevators. Room 313 was at the end of a long, carpeted hallway. The overhead lights were motion-activated, illuminating sections of corridor as she walked, then dimming behind her, creating a bubble of light that traveled with her. Her footsteps were absorbed by the thick carpet, making her progress eerily silent. The room itself appeared normal when she first entered. Queen bed with pristine white linens, desk with the standard hotel information folder, television mounted on the wall, bathroom to the right. Clara set her suitcase on the luggage rack and immediately went to adjust the air conditioning, which was blowing frigid air into the already cool room. It was only after she'd washed her face and changed into more comfortable clothes that she noticed the notepad on the desk. All hotel rooms have them. Small pads with the hotel logo placed beside the telephone for guest convenience. This one, however, had something written on it, faint but visible even from across the room. Clara picked it up, curiosity overcoming her initial reluctance to touch something that might have been left by a previous guest. The message, written in a hurried scrawl with a ballpoint pen that had been running out of ink, read, "Do not answer the door." no matter what. She stared at it, turning the notepad over in her hands. The rest of the pad was untouched, pristine white sheets waiting for notes that had never been written, just that single warning on the top page. Weird, she murmured to the empty room. Probably left by some previous guest playing a prank, or perhaps someone with anxiety issues or paranoid tendencies. Clara had worked briefly with a man who could never stay in hotels without checking under the bed and behind. Shower curtains for imagined intruders. She tore off the page, crumpled it, and tossed it into the small wastebasket under the desk. Then she unpacked her essentials, toiletries, phone charger, tablet, and settled on the bed to check her emails before sleep. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the window with growing insistence. Clara found the sound soothing, a white noise that helped mask the occasional mechanical hums and clicks of the hotel's systems. She set an alarm for 6 a.m., placed her phone on the nightstand, and turned off the bedside lamp. In the darkness, with only the faint glow from the bathroom nightlight and the occasional flash of aircraft warning lights through the rain-streaked window, Clara drifted toward sleep. The day's stress began to dissolve. Her breathing deepened. Her thoughts fragmented into the peculiar logic of near dreams, until the knock came, 3 distinct sounds against her door. Not the rapid, officious knock of hotel staff, nor the hesitant tap of someone unsure if they had the right room. This was deliberate, measured. Knock, knock, knock. Clara's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. She checked her phone. 12:03 a.m. She sat up, listening. Hotels have their own nocturnal rhythms, late arrivals, early departures, staff movements. But the clerk had said she was the only one on this floor. Knock, knock, knock again with the exact same spacing, the exact same pressure. "Who is it?" she called, not moving from the bed. No answer. No voice identifying themselves as staff or security. No retreating footsteps. Just silence. And then the background noises reasserted themselves. The air conditioning, the rain, the distant hum of the building systems. The crumpled note flashed in her mind. Do not answer the door, no matter what. Clara reached for her phone, opened the hotel's information in her confirmation email, and called the front desk. The phone rang 5 times before someone answered. "Front desk, how may I help you?" It was a different voice than the clerk who had checked her in. "Hi, this is Clara Winters in room 313. Someone just knocked on my door, but they didn't identify themselves." A pause. "I apologize for the disturbance, Ms. Winters. We don't have any staff scheduled for room checks at this hour. Let me check if maintenance or security is on your floor." Clara waited, the phone pressed to her ear, eyes fixed on the door. There was no peephole, an odd omission she hadn't noticed earlier. "Ms. Winters, I've checked with all on-duty staff. No one has been sent to your floor. Would you like me to send security to investigate?" "Yes, please," she said, then hesitated. "The clerk mentioned I was the only guest on the 3rd floor. Is that still the case?" Another pause. Longer this time. "According to our system, yes. You're the only current guest in the east wing of floor 3. Thank you, please do send security." After hanging up, Clara remained motionless, listening intently. No further knocks came, no sounds of movement in the hallway, just the constant patter of rain, now mixed with an occasional rumble of distant thunder. 15 minutes later, a QC's different knock came at her door, this one preceded by a clear voice. "Security, Ms. Winters." She approached cautiously, confirmed the man's identity through a brief exchange, and opened the door. The security officer was middle-aged, with the weary expression of someone working the overnight shift at a job where nothing usually happens. "We've checked the entire floor," he told her. "No one's up here but you. All other rooms are vacant and locked. Could have been someone who got off on the wrong floor, realized their mistake, and left." Clara nodded, not entirely convinced, but unable to articulate why the explanation felt insufficient. "There's one other thing," she said. "When I checked in, there was a note on the desk pad that said, 'Do not answer the door no matter what.' Is that standard for this room?" The security officer frowned. Definitely not standard. Probably left by a previous guest. Housekeeping. Should have replaced the notepad. He shrugged apologetically. Short-staffed lately, like everyone else, things get missed. After assuring her he'd make additional rounds and providing his direct extension in case of further disturbances, The officer left. Clara double-checked the door lock and security bar, then returned to bed, though sleep now seemed unlikely. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke with a start at 3:17 a.m., the red digits of the bedside clock momentarily disorienting her. The rain had stopped, leaving an unusual silence broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. Clara lay still, trying to identify what had awakened her. No knocks, no obvious noises, just a persistent sense of wrongness, the kind of instinctive discomfort humans evolved to recognize threats before they could be consciously identified. She reached for her phone, needing its light as much as any function it might provide. The screen illuminated, showing no missed calls or messages, just the time and her alarm set for 6 a.m. On impulse, she opened her browser and searched for the hotel's name along with room 313. The first few results were just generic booking sites, but the fourth link down caught her attention, a Reddit thread titled "Strange Experience in Room 313 at O'Hare Airport Hotel." The post was from 18 months ago, written by a user named Airport Nomad 28. Has anyone else stayed in room 313 at the hotel name near O'Hare? Had the weirdest experience last week. Checked in late due to a cancelled flight. Around midnight, someone knocked on my door 3 times. When I called out, no one answered. Called the front desk. They said no staff were on my floor and I was the only guest in that wing. Security found nothing. The really strange part was finding a note in the desk drawer that said, "They always knock at midnight." Freaked me out. Enough that I checked out at 5 a.m. and went back to the airport. Just curious if it's some kind of prank the staff plays on solo travelers. The thread had few responses, mostly people suggesting it was either a drunk guest who got the wrong room or hotel employees messing with travelers. One comment, however, stood out. Used to work maintenance at an airport hotel, not saying which one. Some rooms get reputations among staff. Not saying I believe in ghosts, but after a while it's hard to explain the patterns. Guests reporting the same experiences in the same rooms, years apart. We had one room where the shower would turn on by itself, always at 3 a.m., always for exactly 2 minutes. Engineers checked everything multiple times, never found a cause. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She scrolled further, finding 2 more brief mentions of room 313 in other threads, both describing the same experience. A knock at midnight, no one there, staff insisting the floor was empty. She set her phone down, suddenly reluctant to learn more. The rational part of her mind insisted there must be a logical explanation. An air pressure issue causing repeated knocking sounds, perhaps, or even hotel staff perpetuating a haunted room myth to generate buzz online. But another part of her, a more primal part that recognized patterns and assessed threats, wasn't interested in rational explanations. It wanted her out of room 313. Clara didn't wait until morning. At 5:30 a.m., fully dressed and packed, she took the elevator to the lobby. A different clerk was at the front desk, a woman in her 40s with the alert demeanor of someone who had already consumed significant caffeine. "Checking out?" she asked, looking surprised. "I have you down for a 6:30 wake-up call." "Change of plans," Clara said, sliding her keycard across the counter. "I need to get to the airport earlier than expected." The clerk nodded, began processing the checkout, then paused, looking at her screen with a small frown. "Room 313? That's odd." Clara felt her pulse quicken. "What's odd?" "That room is usually blocked for maintenance. Water damage from a storm. Back in 2021. We don't typically assign it." The clerk looked up. "Was everything all right with the room? No issues with leaking or musty smells?" "You're saying room 313 isn't supposed to be in circulation?" Clara asked, ignoring the question. The clerk typed something, her frown deepening. "According to our system, it's not. It's marked as unavailable." She studied Clara with newfound concern. "Are you sure you were in 313? Let me check your original assignment." More typing. "This is strange. Your reservation was for room 312. I don't know why Evan would have given you 313 instead." She looked genuinely perplexed. "I'm going to have to fill out an incident report. We can't have guests in rooms that haven't been cleared by maintenance." Clara felt an odd detachment, as if the conversation were happening to someone else. "I'd like to see room 313, she said suddenly. "Right now, before I leave." The clerk hesitated. "I'm not sure that's—" "Please," Clara interrupted. "I just want to confirm something. You can come with me." Perhaps it was the intensity in Clara's voice, or simple curiosity about the mix-up, but the clerk agreed. She called over a maintenance worker who happened to be in the lobby, asked him to bring his master key, and the three of them took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallway looked different in the early morning light that filtered through windows at either end. Less ominous, more worn. Room 313 was exactly where Clara remembered it, at the end of the hall. The maintenance worker unlocked the door, pushed it open and stepped aside. The room beyond was not the one Clara had slept in. There was no bed, no desk, no television, just bare subfloor, some plastic sheeting in one corner, and a visible water stain that ran along one wall up to a brownish line about halfway to the ceiling. "This room has been stripped for renovation," the maintenance man said, confused. "Has been for months." Clara stepped inside, her mind struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with her vivid memories of the night before. The dimensions were the same. The window placement matched. But everything else, all the furnishings, the bathroom door, the carpet, was gone. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "I stayed here last night. My things were here. There was a bed, a desk." The clerk and maintenance worker exchanged glances, the universal look of people confronted with someone they believe might be confused, delusional, or playing an elaborate prank. "You must have been in 312, the clerk said gently. "It's an easy mistake when you're tired. The rooms look identical when they're furnished." Clara wanted to argue, to insist she knew which room she'd been in, but doubt had begun to creep in. Had she misread the number on her keycard? Had exhaustion confused her memory? "Someone's going to get written up for this," the clerk muttered, making a note on her phone. "We can't have guests wandering into construction areas." Clara said nothing more. She collected her checkout receipt, wheeled her suitcase across the rain-damp parking lot to the airport shuttle stop, and tried to make sense of what had happened. By the time she boarded her flight to Minneapolis 2 hours later, she had almost convinced herself that she had indeed been in room 312, that fatigue and the stress of travel had colored her perception. Almost. That night, safely home in her Minneapolis apartment, Clara unpacked her suitcase, her toiletry bag, her chargers, her neatly folded clothes. At the bottom, caught in the lining, was a small piece of paper, crumpled, then flattened out again. In faded ink, the words remained, clearly legible, "Do not answer the door." No matter what, she hadn't thrown it away after all. Or perhaps she had, and someone or something had returned it to her. Clara never stays in hotels alone anymore. When travel is unavoidable, she books rooms with colleagues or friends. She requests specific room numbers, away from the end of hallways, and she never, under any circumstances, acknowledges knocks at her door after midnight. Perhaps it was all a mix-up, a series of coincidences and misunderstandings amplified by fatigue and suggestion. Perhaps room 313 does exist, properly furnished and occasionally occupied by travelers who notice nothing unusual. Or perhaps in certain places, the veil between what should be and what is grows thin. Perhaps some rooms remember things they shouldn't. The rain continues to fall on hotels and houses and streets across the country. And sometimes, in the small hours of the night, knocks echo down empty hallways waiting for someone to answer. The common thread. I've spent years collecting stories like these. Tales that exist in the liminal space between coincidence and the inexplicable. I'm not a paranormal investigator or a ghost hunter. I'm simply someone who listens when people need to share experiences that don't fit neatly into the world as we understand it. What draws me to accounts like Ellie's, Jared's, and Clara's isn't their suggestion of the supernatural. In fact, none of these stories definitively crosses that line. There are no apparitions, no impossible physical events, no violations of natural law. What makes them compelling is their ambiguity, the way they resist complete explanation, while remaining tantalizingly close to ordinary reality. Consider what these three experiences share. Each occurred on rainy nights. Each involved a person alone, separated from their normal context. Each presented a situation where perception itself came into question, and each left its central figure. Fundamentally changed, more cautious, more aware of the fragility of what we call normality. Rain itself is a boundary phenomenon, neither fully of the earth nor fully of the sky. It transforms landscapes, alters sounds, obscures vision. It creates a world slightly adjacent to our sunny, clear day reality, a world where the unusual might more easily slip through, or where our perceptions might be just different enough to notice what's been there all along. Ellie never discovered who or what stood watching her house on those rainy nights. The photographs showed nothing, yet her neighbor confirmed seeing someone. The mysterious text came from a number that couldn't be traced. Perhaps there was a perfectly ordinary stalker, someone who knew how to avoid digital footprints. Or perhaps what watched her existed just at the edge of perceptibility, visible only under certain conditions to certain eyes. Jared delivered groceries to a building that official records said was empty, abandoned years before. Yet he remembers the silent man with surgical gloves, remembers placing bags on a table that shouldn't have existed. The photo he received showed him at the door. Proof he was there, proof someone was watching. But proof of what exactly? A squatter with elaborate means, a glitch in corporate records, or something that manifests only when it rains, only when someone arrives with the specific items it requires. Clara stayed in a room that, according to hotel management, had been stripped bare months earlier. Yet she remembers every detail: the bed, the desk, the notepad with its warning. She has the note itself as evidence. Did she inadvertently access some pocket of the past? Did she dream it all? Or does room 313 exist in multiple states, furnished for some visitors, empty for others? I don't have answers for them. I don't think they expect them anymore. What they wanted, what most people who share such stories want, is simply to be heard. To have someone acknowledge that their experience matters, even if it can't be explained. We live in an age of unprecedented documentation. Our phones record our locations, our communications, our images. Surveillance cameras watch public spaces. Data is collected, stored, analyzed. We should be able to verify everything, to find evidence for any occurrence. And yet stories like these persist. Moments slip through the cracks of our perfect documentation. Experiences occur that leave no digital footprint or contradictory ones. People encounter things that shouldn't be possible, yet aren't quite impossible enough to qualify as supernatural. Perhaps that's why rain figures so prominently in these accounts. It creates static in our perfectly documented world. It obscures cameras, dampens sounds, provides alternative explanations for electrical glitches and spotty signals. Rain is nature's way of reminding us that clarity is temporary, that our perception has limits, that the world remains in fundamental ways mysterious. So the next time you find yourself alone on a rainy night, and something seems slightly wrong, a figure that shouldn't be there, a location that doesn't quite match your memory, a knock when no one should be knocking, pay attention. Not in fear, but in awareness. The world might be showing you something important, something that exists in the spaces between certainties, in the static between channels, in the blur between raindrops. And if you have a story of your own, I'm listening. Because while I don't know what Ellie saw across the street on those rainy nights, or who Jared delivered groceries to in that abandoned building, or where Clara really spent the night when her flight was delayed, I believe their experiences matter. I believe they glimpsed something significant, even if we don't fully understand what it was. The rain continues to fall, and in its steady rhythm, other stories are taking shape, waiting to be told. If this story kept you watching until now, hit like and subscribe. The next one might be waiting for you right now. And there's one more, he's waiting just a click away. Maybe it explains what was left unsaid here. Maybe it only deepens the mystery.